My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old. And on the night of my sister's wedding, in front of 200 guests dressed in tuxedos and gowns, she slapped me so hard the sound cut through the music like a gunshot. The ballroom went silent. Glasses froze mid-air. Every eye turned toward me. I heard the whispers, sharp, cruel, echoing louder than the DJ. Some people smirked. Others looked away in awkward pity. Me. I just stood there, my cheeks stinging, my heart sinking, but my silence screaming louder than any words could. It wasn't the first time I'd been humiliated. In my family, I was the overlooked one, the so-called failure. The one who never measured up. The one sent to run errands, carry bags, fix problems no one else wanted to deal with. My sister, on the other hand, was the golden child. The perfect daughter. And that night, she glowed under chandeliers, all eyes on her, while I was nothing more than an afterthought. But this slap, it wasn't just a family fight. It was public. A declaration to 200 people that I was beneath her. That I was worthless. I saw relatives whisper behind their hands. Old neighbors shaking their heads as if to say, well, we always knew Emily wouldn't amount to anything. And worst of all, my parents didn't even flinch. It was almost as if they agreed. But what no one in that ballroom knew was this. 24 hours earlier, I had signed something that would change everything. A deal so big, so life-changing, that the same people laughing at me would soon be tripping over themselves just to shake my hand. So I didn't fight back. I didn't shout. I didn't even move. Because deep down I knew something they didn't. That slap was the last time anyone would ever look down on me again. Growing up as a Carter wasn't easy, at least not for me. My parents lived in a quiet suburb in Ohio. Big 2-story house, white picket fence, the kind of place neighbors thought was picture perfect. And for my sister Olivia it really was. She was the golden girl, the one with straight A's, captain of the cheerleading squad, the daughter my parents loved to show off at block parties. And then there was me, Emily. The other one. It didn't matter what I did, it was never enough. When Olivia got an A, she was celebrated. When I got an A, it was expected. When she won her cheer trophy, they invited the entire neighborhood to see it. When I won my debate competition, my mom barely mentioned it over dinner. It's funny how small things cut the deepest. I remember one birthday, my 16th. I came downstairs expecting balloons, maybe a cake. Instead, my parents were rushing out the door, all dressed up. They had forgotten it was my birthday. They were headed to Olivia's big game. I sat there at the kitchen table alone, a single candle stuck in a day-old muffin, whispering, "Happy birthday" to myself. Then there was graduation. Not Olivia's. Mine. I walked across the stage, diploma in hand, heart pounding with pride. I looked into the crowd, searching for my parents. Their seats were empty. Later, I found out they had left early to take Olivia to a modeling audition. My achievement was nothing compared to her opportunity. Even when I worked hard to prove myself, it felt invisible. I got my first part-time job at a diner down the street. Every weekend I'd scrub dishes, serve coffee, pick up shifts no one else wanted. One night I came home excited, holding my first paycheck, $112. I thought my parents would be proud. Instead, my dad glanced at it, smirked, and said, "That's barely enough to fill Olivia's gas tank." My excitement crumbled in an instant. Over and over, I was made to feel like a shadow in my own home. Olivia got the new clothes, the new phone, the praise. I got hand-me-downs, lectures, and silence. Relatives compared us constantly. Emily's sweet, but Olivia, now she's the real star. At family reunions, I became the one who refilled drinks, carried plates, cleared tables. Like my only role was to serve. But here's the thing. Sometimes being overlooked gives you a strange kind of power. Because in the silence, I started building something nobody saw. While Olivia was out at parties, I was tucked away in my room with a second-hand laptop, teaching myself design, marketing, and business. I was clumsy at first, failing more times than I could count. But every insult, every dismissal became fuel. I'll never forget my grandma, the only one who truly believed in me. She'd call me into the kitchen when I was down, slide a plate of warm cookies across the table and say, "Emily, they don't see it now. But you're not meant to follow in anyone's shadow. You're meant to build your own light." Those words stayed with me. Even when my mom rolled her eyes at me spending too much time on that silly computer. Even when my dad told me, Olivia's our best shot at making the family proud, I kept working in secret. Because deep down I knew I was different. Not less, just different. I wasn't the golden child. I wasn't the cheerleader or the model. I was the girl who learned to fight quietly, who carried invisible scars, who was underestimated so deeply that no one saw me coming. And that's what made me dangerous. Every ignored birthday. Every empty seat at my milestones. Every cruel laugh when I tried to celebrate a small win. It was all building up to something they could never have predicted. Because while they were busy polishing Olivia's crown, I was quietly building an empire of my own. Most people never saw what went on behind my closed bedroom door. To the world, I was still Olivia's awkward sister, the one who couldn't keep up. But late at night while the house slept, I was alive in a way no one could imagine. I had bought a second-hand laptop from a yard sale, its screen cracked at the corner, keys sticky from years of use. It wasn't much, but it was my window into a different future. With it, I taught myself everything I could: graphic design, social media marketing, website building. Hours blurred into mornings. My eyes burned, my hands ached, but I didn't stop. Some nights I'd cry quietly while working because the insults from that day still echoed in my head. You'll never make it, Emily. Olivia's the star, not you. But instead of breaking me, those words became fuel. Every project I finished felt like a small rebellion, proof that I wasn't as useless as they thought. My first real opportunity came by accident. I was scrolling through an online forum when I found a small business owner begging for help with a logo. I offered to do it for $50. When he paid me, I stared at the money in disbelief. I had just made money not by waiting tables or scrubbing dishes, but by using my mind. It wasn't much, but it felt like the universe whispering, "Keep going." From there I built slowly. I said yes to tiny jobs, social media posts, flyers for local shops, websites for people who could barely afford them. Each time I pushed myself to do better. Each time I tucked the money away, saving for something bigger. But it wasn't just about money, it was about identity. For the first time I was building something that belonged to me, not my parents, not Olivia, not anyone else. So I had to keep it a secret. If my parents had known I was wasting my time on side projects instead of focusing on a real job, they would have torn me down before I even started. So I played the part they expected: quiet, compliant, invisible. By day I washed dishes at the diner. By night I built a foundation no one could see. It wasn't glamorous. There were nights when my internet got cut off and I'd sit in the public library until closing, finishing client work. There were weeks when I skipped meals just to afford better design software. I pawned my old guitar for a faster hard drive. Every sacrifice was a brick laid quietly in the dark. The loneliness was the hardest part. I couldn't share my small victories with my family because I knew they'd laugh. But there was one person I could lean on: Grandma. I'd bring my laptop to her kitchen, show her the logos and websites I was working on. She'd smile with pride and say, "Emily, don't you dare stop. One day they'll see what I see." Those words carried me through every moment of doubt. And slowly my side hustle started to grow. I landed a client in New York who paid me more than the diner did in 2 weeks. Then another in California. Word spread through referrals, and suddenly I wasn't just making logos, I was managing entire brands. I worked in silence, stacking wins like hidden cards in a poker game. And with each one I felt the power shifting, even if no one else noticed yet. By the time Olivia was getting fitted for her wedding dress, I had already built a portfolio strong enough to rival small agencies. I had savings in my account, contracts on the table, and an offer from an investor who saw potential in what I was building. But I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not Olivia. Not even my closest friends. Because I wanted them to keep underestimating me. I wanted them to believe I was still the quiet, invisible Emily who didn't matter. Because when the truth came out, I didn't want it to just surprise them. I wanted it to shock them so deeply they'd never forget the moment they realized how wrong they'd been. And that moment was coming sooner than they thought. Because the day of Olivia's wedding wasn't just her big day. It was mine too. The day of Olivia's wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. For me, it felt like walking into a battlefield I hadn't chosen. The hotel ballroom gleamed with crystal chandeliers and white roses. 200 guests filled the room. Neighbors, relatives, business partners of my father. Everyone dressed in elegance, sipping champagne and smiling for photos. Olivia looked radiant, draped in lace and pearls, the center of attention as always. Me. I was in the background, carrying trays, adjusting decorations, running errands. My parents didn't even ask, they ordered. Emily, fix the centerpieces. Emily, make sure the kids get their food. No one saw me as a guest. I was staff. I told myself to stay calm. I reminded myself, they don't know what you're hiding. Just get through the night. But humiliation has a way of finding me, especially when Olivia's involved. It started small. During the cocktail hour, one of Olivia's friends sneered when she saw me bringing out a tray of drinks. Wow, Emily, didn't know you were working here. The girls laughed and I forced a smile, swallowing the sting. Then came the whispers. Relatives leaning close, not so subtle. Poor Emily, always the helper. She never turned out like Olivia. Every sentence felt like a needle. But the breaking point came during dinner. One of the younger cousins accidentally spilled juice on Olivia's dress. Before the waiter could even step in, Olivia's eyes shot straight to me. Emily, she snapped, her voice slicing through the music. Why can't you do anything right? You ruin everything. I froze, stunned. Then it happened. She raised her hand and slapped me. Hard. The sound cracked through the ballroom. My head jerked to the side. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Gasps filled the room. Guests turned, forks clattered against plates. Some laughed nervously, others just stared. And me, standing there with my cheek burning, my hands trembling, my dignity shattered in front of 200 witnesses. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. But worse than the slap were the faces around me. Relatives shaking their heads as if to say, see? She deserves it. My parents watching coldly, not moving to defend me. My father whispering something under his breath that made my mother smirk. To them this wasn't shocking, it was expected. In that moment I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. I blinked back, tears refusing to let them fall. I clenched my jaw, my silence the only weapon I had left. But deep inside another feeling stirred. A fire. Because Olivia thought that slap was the peak of her power. She thought she had humiliated me beyond repair. She thought once again she had proved I was nothing. What she didn't know, what no one in that glittering ballroom knew, was that I wasn't the same Emily they had always stepped on. I had signed a contract just the day before. A deal worth more than anything Olivia could imagine. A deal that would put me on a stage far brighter than her wedding lights. So as the crowd whispered, as Olivia basked in her dominance, as my parents silently approved, I stood still, not because I was weak, but because I was waiting. Waiting for the moment when my truth would tear apart their illusion. That slap wasn't my ending. It was the spark that lit the explosion they never saw coming. And by the time the night was over, Olivia would no longer be the only Carter people were talking about. After the slap I didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of them. I stood frozen for a heartbeat, my cheeks stinging, my chest heavy, but my silence louder than Olivia's triumph. She turned away as if I were nothing, as if 200 guests hadn't just witnessed her degrade her sister in the most public way possible. The music started again, the waiters shuffled nervously, the crowd pretended to go back to their meals, but I could feel the weight of every eye on me. I slipped out of the ballroom, cheeks burning, hands shaking. But not from shame. From anticipation. Because while Olivia thought she had silenced me, I was only minutes away from a phone call that would change everything. I ducked into a side corridor of the hotel, the muffled music from the ballroom fading behind me. I pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls. 2 new emails marked urgent. All from the same name. Michael Grant, CEO of Grant Media Holdings, one of the largest digital agencies in the country. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This was the deal I had been chasing for months. The one I had lost sleep over, poured every ounce of myself into. If it went through, it would launch my small business out of obscurity and into a national spotlight. And just yesterday, while Olivia was getting her nails done for the wedding, I had signed the preliminary contract. It wasn't just a job. It was a multi-million-dollar partnership. I leaned against the wall, breath shaky, trying to process the whiplash of emotions. 10 minutes ago, my sister had slapped me like I was her servant. And now my phone was buzzing with the kind of news that could flip our family's entire world upside down. I thought about going back into the ballroom, pretending nothing had happened. That's what I had always done. Swallow the humiliation, put on a smile, disappear into the background. But something inside me had shifted. I couldn't do it anymore. Not when I was standing on the edge of everything I'd been working for in secret. So instead of returning to the wedding chaos, I walked straight out of the hotel, heels clicking against the marble floor, and stepped into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered around me as I called Michael back. My voice trembled when I spoke, but not from fear. From the sheer weight of the moment. "Emily," he said, his voice warm, steady. "We're moving forward. I wanted to personally congratulate you. Tomorrow morning the press release goes live. I'd also like to invite you to New York next week to meet the board." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, the tears finally spilling. Not of pain but of relief. Of validation. Of every small win, every late night, every sacrifice suddenly being worth it. "Thank you," I whispered. "You have no idea what this means." "Oh, I do," he said with a laugh. "This is the beginning of something huge. You're about to be everywhere." I hung up and stood on the curb outside the hotel, my chest rising and falling with sharp, shaky breaths. The same hotel that just witnessed my worst humiliation was about to be the stage for my greatest triumph. They just didn't know it yet. I could almost hear Grandma's voice in my head. "One day they'll see what I see." And that day had arrived. Back inside the ballroom, I knew the gossip about the slap would be spreading like wildfire. Olivia probably sat smug at the head table, guests patting her hand, parents whispering about how I embarrassed the family again. They thought I was hiding in shame somewhere, too weak to face the crowd. But what I was really doing was preparing for the reveal. Emails pinged my phone one after another. Congratulations from executives, confirmations from PR teams, requests for interviews. My name was already being circulated in circles Olivia couldn't even dream of entering. And the timing couldn't have been more poetic. Tomorrow morning, when the press release went live, my name would be plastered across national headlines. Emily Carter signs landmark deal with Grant Media Holdings. Not Olivia's. Not my parents'. I stood there under the streetlight, my dress wrinkled, makeup smudged from tears, hair messy from the chaos. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care how I looked. Because I finally knew who I was. I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I wasn't the family embarrassment. I wasn't the girl meant to serve in silence. I was the woman who had turned every insult into fuel, every humiliation into fire, every dismissal into determination. And tomorrow the world would see it. I went back into the hotel not as the Emily who had walked out, but as someone different. Stronger. Untouchable. As I entered the ballroom, I saw Olivia laughing with her bridesmaids, my parents basking in the glow of their golden child. They didn't even glance at me. Good. Let them ignore me one last time. Because in less than 24 hours, they wouldn't be able to ignore me ever again. By the time the sun rose, their whispers would turn to shock. Their laughter would turn to silence. And that slap? It would be the last time anyone in that family dared to put me down. Because the empire I had built in secret was about to step into the light. And when it did, it would shine so brightly it would blind them all. The morning after the wedding, the city woke up buzzing with headlines. Emily Carter signs landmark deal with Grant Media Holdings. My name was everywhere. LinkedIn posts, press releases, business blogs, even local news stations. My inbox flooded with messages. My phone vibrated non-stop. Old clients congratulating me, new ones begging for a meeting, journalists requesting interviews. And by noon, the story had spread further than I ever imagined. The irony? Most of the people at Olivia's wedding had no idea who I really was. To them, I was just the other Carter sister. The one slapped, shamed, and forgotten. But now, those same guests were reading about me while sipping their morning coffee. They were seeing my face on their screens, not Olivia's. I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth was speaking louder than I ever could. By the afternoon, the ripple reached my family. I was at my small apartment, still in disbelief when my phone lit up with my mother's name. I almost didn't answer. But something inside me wanted to hear it. Emily. Her voice was tight, trembling. Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you say you were working with Grant Media? I almost laughed. After years of being ignored, dismissed, and treated like I was nothing, now she wanted answers. Because you never cared to ask, I said flatly. There was silence on the other end. And in that silence I heard everything. Her shame, her shock, her realization that she didn't know her own daughter at all. By evening, the news had spread to relatives, neighbors, and colleagues. My phone buzzed with screenshots. Cousins gossiping in group chats, distant relatives posting on Facebook, neighbors commenting, "Is this the same Emily Carter we saw at Olivia's wedding?" The whispers had shifted. The night before, I was the girl slapped in front of 200 people. Now I was the woman who had landed one of the biggest contracts in the industry. But the true explosion came later that week. Grant Media invited me to New York to meet their executive team. They wanted to introduce me publicly at a conference filled with entrepreneurs, investors, and industry leaders. I walked into the grand hall, cameras flashing, my name projected on giant screens behind me. Emily Carter, founder and CEO. For the first time, I wasn't hiding in anyone's shadow. I was standing in my own light. The applause shook the room. Reporters shouted questions. Investors pushed forward to shake my hand. In that moment, I wasn't just Emily, the forgotten daughter. I was Emily Carter, the woman who had built something powerful enough to demand respect. And just when I thought the moment couldn't get more surreal, I spotted familiar faces in the crowd. My parents. Olivia. They had shown up, uninvited, wide-eyed and pale. For the first time in my life, they weren't the center of attention. They weren't the ones being celebrated. They were just spectators, watching as the daughter they had humiliated became the one everyone wanted to know. I locked eyes with Olivia across the room. The same sister who slapped me in front of 200 guests now stood frozen, her jaw tight, her smile brittle. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. And in that moment I didn't need revenge. Because this was bigger than revenge. This was truth. This was justice. The same guests who once whispered about poor Emily were now whispering about her. That's Olivia's sister, the one who, their voices trailed off, replaced by laughter not at me but at her. The tables had turned. And they weren't turning back. That night as I stood on the stage under the spotlight, I realized something profound. I didn't need to slap back. I didn't need to scream or fight for validation. Success had done it for me. Olivia's slap had echoed through the ballroom. But my name, my story was echoing through the entire country. And no one could ever erase it. News travels fast in America, but gossip travels faster. Within days of the press release, the slap at Olivia's wedding had become a twisted kind of urban legend. Guests who had laughed at me whispered a different story now. Did you hear? The girl Olivia slapped. She's the one who signed that multi-million-dollar deal. Relatives who used to greet me with pity now sent me long messages, dripping with flattery. Distant cousins suddenly wanted to reconnect. Neighbors who once said, "Emily's such a burden on that family," were now bragging, "We always knew she was smart." But the same tide that lifted me pulled my family under. Olivia's perfect image began to crack. At first she brushed it off, laughing with her friends. So what? Emily got lucky. I'm still the one everyone admires. But admiration doesn't survive when respect is gone. Her slap was the talk of the town. Clips of people imitating it spread online after guests described it in vivid detail. The bride who slapped her sister at her own wedding. That was her title now. Not the glowing bride. Not the golden child. Just the sister who humiliated the wrong person on the wrong night. Her friends started pulling away, uncomfortable with the attention. Some of her husband's colleagues whispered, wondering what kind of woman he had married. And Olivia, who once shone in every room, now avoided crowds, terrified of the laughter that might follow. My parents fared no better. For years, they had flaunted Olivia as their crown jewel while dismissing me as their burden. But when the truth surfaced, their pride turned into shame. At the grocery store, Old neighbors cornered my mother. Why didn't you ever talk about Emily's work? You must be so proud. She smiled weakly, fumbling for answers, but people weren't stupid. They knew. They knew she had ignored me just like they knew Olivia had humiliated me. And now they judged her for it. My father, who once boasted about Olivia's beauty contests, suddenly had nothing to say. Business associates who read about my deal looked at him differently. Some even asked, "So, Emily's your daughter, right?" As if they couldn't believe he'd kept me hidden. He'd nod, embarrassed, and change the subject. The same relatives who once worshipped Olivia now whispered about my parents' favoritism. The Carters, once respected in our small Ohio community, were now reduced to gossip fodder. Me. While their world crumbled, mine expanded. I was invited to speak at conferences, to share my journey of building a business from scratch. Articles called me a rising star in digital branding. Clients poured in from Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. I traveled more in 1 year than Olivia had in her entire life. One night, I walked into a Manhattan gala where my name was listed alongside CEOs, investors, and innovators. Flashbulbs went off as I stepped onto the carpet. My heart pounded, not from nerves but from disbelief. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the girl carrying trays, the one slapped in front of 200 people. I was the woman they couldn't stop talking about. And the more my success grew, the more my family's silence became deafening. They couldn't deny me anymore, but they couldn't accept the mirror my success held up to them either. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel satisfaction watching the tables turn. When I saw Olivia's strained smile at community gatherings, when I overheard relatives say, "Emily's the real star now," a part of me healed. But another part of me felt something else, something deeper. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about finally stepping out of the cage they had built for me. For years they defined me by what I lacked. Now the world defined me by what I created. And no amount of slaps, insults, or dismissals could ever take that away. By the end of that year, my life was unrecognizable. My company had doubled in size. My story had been featured in Forbes. Invitations to panels and interviews stacked up on my desk. My bank account held numbers I never thought I'd see. Meanwhile, Olivia's name faded. Her slap lived longer than her wedding glow. My parents stopped talking about her achievements and quietly, reluctantly began mentioning mine. But the truth was clear to everyone. The Carter family's golden child had lost her shine. And the daughter they ignored, humiliated, and dismissed was the one carrying their name into history. It took months before my parents finally reached out. Not with congratulations, not with pride, at least not at first. It was desperation. "Emily," my mother said one evening over the phone, her voice trembling, we didn't realize. We should have supported you more. Can we meet? Can we talk?" I agreed, but not out of obligation. Out of choice. When I walked into their living room, it felt smaller than I remembered. My father sat stiff on the couch, Olivia beside him, her once bright smile now fragile, almost apologetic. For the first time in my life, they weren't looking at me with disdain. They were looking at me with fear. Not fear of me, but fear of the truth. "Emily," my dad began, clearing his throat, we're proud of you. We didn't see it before, but you've made something incredible of yourself. We hope you can forgive us." Forgive. The word hung in the air like a weight. For years I had begged for scraps of validation. For years I had cried myself to sleep wondering why I wasn't enough. And now, after all the humiliation, all the slaps, literal and metaphorical, they wanted forgiveness. I looked at them, my family who had spent a lifetime teaching me to doubt myself, and I finally understood something. I didn't need their approval. Not anymore. "I'll always be your daughter," I said, my voice steady. "But I'll never be your servant again. Respect isn't optional. It's non-negotiable. If you want me in your life, it has to be as an equal, not as a shadow." The room went silent. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Olivia lowered her gaze. My father nodded stiffly, but he didn't argue. Because he couldn't. The power had shifted and it wasn't going back. Driving home that night, I thought about everything I had been through. The forgotten birthdays, the empty seats at my graduations, the cruel laughter when I tried to shine. I realized those moments had shaped me more than any praise ever could. Because being underestimated taught me resilience. Being ignored taught me independence. And being humiliated taught me that silence can be louder than words when it's paired with undeniable success. People often think revenge is about shouting back, about proving someone wrong in the moment. But I learned the best revenge isn't loud. It isn't petty. It doesn't need an audience. The best revenge is success so undeniable that even the people who broke you are forced to watch you rise. And that's exactly what happened. Today when I walk into a room, I don't shrink anymore. I don't measure myself against Olivia or against anyone else. I know my worth because I built it from the ground up. Sometimes, people still bring up the slap at the wedding like it's a funny story. I just smile. Because that slap didn't destroy me, it exposed me. It was the spark that lit the fire, the moment that forced me to stop hiding and finally step into who I was meant to be. And here's the truth, I don't hate Olivia. I don't even hate my parents. I've let go of that. But I'll never forget. Because forgetting means losing the lesson. And the lesson is simple. Respect is not a gift you wait to be given. It's a boundary you decide to enforce. So to anyone who's ever been humiliated, dismissed, or underestimated, hear me clearly. You don't need to shout to prove yourself. You don't need to beg for their recognition. Build quietly. Work relentlessly. And when the time comes, let your success do the talking. Because one day the same people who laughed at you will have no choice but to clap. And trust me, that sound is louder than any slap could ever be.